In the last episode of Weapon History, we took a look at the Browning automatic rifle, America's attempt at providing their troops in Europe with something powerful and portable. This week we're exploring a British weapon that at one point during the early 1900s was considered the most powerful handgun in the entire world. Today on Battlefield 1 Weapon History, we're taking a look at the Mars automatic pistol. And as always, before we take a look at the history, let's see what DICE have done with this weapon here in Battlefield 1. The Mars Automatic is a semi-automatic pistol only available to the Scout class, and it's a high damage, steady firing weapon capable of taking players down in 3 shots to the body up close. It features a 10-round magazine and can hold a bullet in the chamber as well, giving it a total of 11 rounds to fire before it's out, and it's chambered for the 8.5mm Mars round. Now that's a little bit of information you might want to remember for later on. Those 11 rounds make it one of the highest capacity pistols in the game overall, and it's helped further with a maximum of 40 damage up close. 2 shots to the head and an enemy is going to be dropping extremely fast. To balance that power though, the Mars features some wicked upwards recoil, a value of 4. Not 0.4 like lots of other weapons I've covered here in the past, 4, which is 10 times the normal amount you'd see on a rifle. This thing kicks like an absolute mule, and its rate of fire isn't as fast as some of the smaller pistols, which are more manageable overall, so it's a weapon that needs to be handled carefully, making each shot count. As I mentioned, it's only available to the Scout class in the game, and that puts it into a special group of weapons. The C96 is solely for the medic, the Repetier M1912 for the support, and the Howder pistol for the assault class. Now in my own view, this weapon functions very similarly to the Deagle that DICE had in Battlefield 4 that they added in the Dragon's Teeth DLC. It's got a high damage, a slow rate of fire, but it's built for someone who knows how to control that power. If you can keep the recoil under wraps, this thing is an absolute beast. It even seems to have the same reload animation as the Deagle as well. I'm not sure if I'm just imagining things, but they do look very similar. Because it is locked into the Scout class, you can pair it with your favourite bolt-action rifle, pretty much anyone that takes your fancy, and you can use it as a protection weapon, as I like to call it. While the Mars might have a maximum damage of 40 up close, at longer ranges the damage drops off considerably. Now out to 14 meters is where you're going to see that 40 damage, so it's perfect if an enemy surprises you. But beyond that distance, the damage steadily drops off down to a minimum of 23 at 30 meters. So don't expect to be pulling off across the map kills with this thing unless you are just extremely lucky. Now if the weapon had been added into the game with another one of its calibers, the Mars did have several different ones, then it might have been more effective at longer ranges. The model in Battlefield 1 is based off of a unit that was created and sent to France for military trials, and that's the 8.5mm that I mentioned earlier. And in fact, considering I'm now starting to talk about the Mars in real life, let's just transition over to the history. Have DICE really honed in here on what makes the Mars so special, or have they exploited that realm of fun in video games and added a little bit of fiction in here? Let's find out. The Mars automatic pistol was developed in the very late 1890s and into the 1900s by an Englishman named Hugh Gabbett Fairfax. It was only ever produced in very, very small numbers, and it underwent constant change during its design and its testing phases. Now I'll try and give you as complete a story of its development as I can, but its design led towards it becoming a replacement for the Webley and Scott revolver. Unfortunately, it never made it that far. In the late 1890s, Fairfax's design for the Mars Auto was in its infancy, and he needed a weapons manufacturer to prototype the design and then to get that prototype working so it could be tested. Now, Webley and Scott, an already very well-established weapons manufacturer and producer of the standard issue British sidearm of World War I, the Webley Mark VI, agreed to work with Fairfax and produce the weapon for him. In 1898, Webley began work on the design, but because it hadn't been patented yet, it would take Fairfax another 2 years to make sure the design was locked down as his own. Now, Webley had been looking to capitalise on the rise of cartridge-fed handguns on the European continent, and the Mars design presented them a great opportunity to go to market with something that was easier to use and be just as hard-hitting as a revolver. Now, by 1900, the relationship had broken down, and design at that point didn't go any further. According to documents, the reason for this breakdown was not entirely clear, but Webley were working on another weapon at the time, the Webley Fosbury automatic revolver, and there were rumours that Webley had tried to influence Fairfax to adapt the Mars's design from his original plans. Now, whatever the reason was, production of the pistol ceased for a while. In 1901, Fairfax managed to get production of the Mars going all by himself. He secured some loans that were in his name, and around 50 units were produced in several different calibers. Now, I've got an image on the screen for you now, and going from left to right, we have the 45 short Mars, the 45 long Mars, the 360 Mars, and the 8.5mm Mars, which was also known as the 355 Mars. The first unit, made by Webley 2 years previously, had chambered the 360 Mars round, and the 8.5mm caliber was made in response to military trials taking place in France. The 45 long was intended to be the standard cartridge for the British military, but due to complaints of severe recoil, the 45 short was produced in response. Of these 50 or so units, each design was said to be almost unique to the next one, with Fairfax constantly tweaking things to try and improve the performance of the weapon. Changing things like the firing mechanism and the magazine parts were the largest reported, and due to its complex design, that meant each unit was very expensive to make. Fairfax's goal was to secure military contracts for the weapon, to recoup all the money that he'd invested, and continue beyond that to make a profit. He took the weapon to about 8 different military trials between 1901 and 1905, and whilst he received lots of positive feedback on the weapon and the power that it possessed, it also came with some reports of very obvious flaws as well. The design was complex beyond the level of which normal soldiers in combat would know how to resolve. The recoil of the weapon, even in its reduced 45 short caliber, was still too severe to make the weapon viable for combat use. The weapon had an extremely hard trigger pull, some 10 pounds or so, and this meant the firer really needed to hammer down on the trigger to get it to move, and in some cases that might be helpful, not setting it off accidentally, but in combat you needed something that would fire reliably every single time. And finally, issues with some of the ammunition not being powerful enough in comparison to the exact same round that had just been fired. And one final thing actually, the weapon ejected spent casings out of the rear, and more often than not, those shells would hit the shooter directly in the face. Throughout the development of the pistol, and despite it going through near constant change, Fairfax failed to fix these glaring issues, and the War Office at the time said this of the Mars: "A very powerful pistol, its accuracy, penetration, and no doubt its stopping power are good. It is, however, complicated. In its present form, would be difficult to clean, and is heavy. A great deal of firing has been carried out with it, the mechanism did not always work, and the recoil was complained of. Much difficulty was experienced in obtaining satisfactory ammunition, and this was no doubt often the cause of defective working of the mechanism." After all of the testing, Fairfax had pretty much bankrupted himself, having funded the whole development process on his own, and he'd failed to secure any contracts for extensive production of the Mars pistol. The patents he'd filed to protect the design were bought by creditors under the name Mars Automatic Pistol Syndicate, and from 1905 they pushed out a design to small Birmingham, England-based gunsmiths to work on an improved design. That improved design came from a man called Clement Brown, and he'd been Fairfax's shop manager at the time whilst he was prototyping the weapon. Efforts to manufacture the weapon failed, however, and in 1907 the syndicate, who'd brought the patents themselves, went bankrupt as well. I just want to give you an example because I was quite surprised myself of how different two Mars pistols can actually look. Here on the left hand side is one sold by the Rock Island Auction Company in the recent past. It's chambered for the .360 caliber round, and you'll notice it's got rather a long barrel on it. This thing was sold for $46,000 at auction. That's a lot of money. And the picture on the right hand side is dubbed the Baby Mars, the M1905, chambered for the .45 short round. And you'll notice it's got rather a short barrel, and apparently this was the last ever Mars pistol that was designed by Fairfax, and you can really see how different the two look. One of them could be a fairly early model, and one could be the last model ever made. It really did undergo a lot of significant changes throughout the years. If you're to look at the weapon in real life and then compare it to what DICE have done with it in the game, you'd have to say they've balanced it according to what Fairfax actually achieved with it. It's a heavy-hitting, slow-firing weapon with severe recoil. But the weapon's design, manufacture, and demise all came before the First World War actually started, some 10 years or so before. So DICE have actually taken the design and pushed it to where it was intended to end up. It was pitched to the British War Office as a potential replacement for the Webley Scott Mark VI revolver. DICE have completed its journey, despite it failing all those years ago. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've learned something today and found this video interesting. A massive thank you to Forgotten Weapons this week. All of this information on the Mars was taken from their article, and I've linked that down below in the description so you can check it out. Make sure you let me know what you think of the Mars Automatic down in the comments, and don't forget to tell me what weapon you want to see here on Weapon History next time. But until then, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.